There are times in Ethiopia that was very difficult to be Jewish. Actually, the Ethiopians used to name us falasha, invaders, people who don't belong to the country. For thousands of years, we live in Ethiopia, but we know that we don't belong there, that our true place is Jerusalem, is Israel, is Zion. When I landed in Israel, I realized that the children running around are a bit lighter. I mean, that morning was actually the first time I realized that my hair is a little bit curly and my skin is dark, but it didn't mean to me something bad or
Was it
something good.
surprising for you the first time you saw non-Black Jews?
Yes. During those years, we were actually convinced that we are the last Jews remain in the world. And we had the responsibility for the survival of this nation.
Shalom and welcome to State of a Nation. I'm Eylon Levy. Israel's detractors love to cast it as a white settler colonial project. That's obviously daft. Not only because the so-called white Jews are refugees from a genocide, the Holocaust, in which they weren't seen as white or even human, but because Israel is a patchwork of Jewish communities from around the world. Europe, Asia, and Africa, including Black Jews from Ethiopia. Cut off from the rest of the Jewish world for over 2,000 years, but with the same dream as their brethren in Europe and the Middle East, to return to Jerusalem. At the age of 9, Mehereta Baruch-Ron emigrated from a small village in Ethiopia to Israel. She traveled 750 kilometers by foot through hell, spending 6 months in a refugee camp in Sudan, hiding her Jewish identity, before finally making it to the Promised Land on an Israeli-organized airlift. Unable to read her native language or Hebrew, she fought to integrate into Israeli society. From these humble beginnings, she rose to become deputy mayor of Tel Aviv and ran for the Knesset with the left-wing Meretz party. She joins me today to unpack the fascinating story of where Ethiopian Jewry came from, how and why she reached the Promised Land, and what she really thinks of so-called progressives on college campuses who think that she is a white colonizer. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
Eylon. What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Mehereta Baruch-Ron, welcome to State of a Nation.
Thank you, Eylon. I'm so excited to be here.
Tell me, how does it feel knowing that right now there are students on campuses in Canada, America, and Australia who think that you are a white colonizer?
Wow, it's so disappointing. It is so confusing because, you know, I'm sitting here as a woman, African-born woman, a Jewish woman, an Israeli. And when I see those people who I believe that they have goodwill, I think they're fighting for the right things, but they are messed it out.
The fact that they've taken a story of Jews coming from all over the world, Jews of color from Ethiopia, and paint Israel somehow as a white settler colony is...
Yeah. Israel, the opposite of colonialism. And you know, I'm going to tell you my story, my journey to Israel, which maybe can give some ideas and some thoughts to those who protest against Israel, to those who support a terrorist, those who support anti-democratic societies, anti-women rights society, anti-gay rights society. And I think they are confused.
That's why I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast, because there's a conception around the world that Israel is this European settler colonial project. We know it's nonsense, but around the world, that's not so clear. And you come from the Ethiopian community, an extraordinary community with a rich heritage, essentially almost entirely relocated to Israel. And I want to understand about your personal story, but also the story of that community, because it's a parallel history from the history of European Jewry that people are mostly used to when they think about the history of the Jews. So I mean, let's start off by asking, how did Jews get to Ethiopia in the first place?
Wonderful question. I'm not sure that I have the exact answer for that, but there are some researchers researching this issue, and one of the ideas is that we are part of the Dan tribe who went south from Egypt, and then eventually, I guess, we got to Ethiopia after the destruction of the first temple. And another perspective talks about us being part of King Solomon and Queen Sheba and the delegation that moved back to Ethiopia. But it is well known that we are disconnected from the Jewish world since the destruction of the first temple,
and that means
for over 2,000 years.
And that means that the form of Judaism that evolved in Ethiopia was separate from the rabbinic tradition.
Yeah.
Didn't have the Mishnah or the Talmud. Tell me about what Ethiopian Judaism is.
As I said, we were disconnected from the Jewish world for 2,000 years. So we practice biblical Judaism. We kept Shabbat, we celebrated holidays like Rosh Hashanah, Shavuot, those who are written in the Bible, but holidays that were established later, like Hanukkah and Purim, we didn't celebrate.
You grew up without Purim or Hanukkah?
Yeah,
I feel so sorry for you.
Actually, but since the age of 10, I celebrate very good those holidays. So during those years, we were actually convinced that we are the last Jews remain in the world. And we had the responsibility for the survival of this nation. So there are times in Ethiopia that was very difficult to be Jewish. Actually, the Ethiopians used to name us Falasha, which means invaders, people who don't belong to the country. So for thousands of years, we live in Ethiopia, but we know that we don't belong there, that our true place is Jerusalem, is Israel, is Zion. And we've been dreaming about the day that we will leave Ethiopia and get to Jerusalem to be free Jews, celebrating and practicing our Judaism freely without being in danger. Because in Ethiopia, not everywhere you can say that you are Jew and be safe. There was persecution. I remember my sister went in one of the cities to study high school. And she told me that in one of the days that she came back to her apartment, she saw that her neighbors burned her clothing because they realized that she is Jew. They believed that because she is Jew, she can harm them by looking at them and do some evil things just because she is Jewish. So our life in Ethiopia was something that forced on us. We felt like this is not our true home, and our true home is Jerusalem. And I remember my uncle, who was kind of religious leader, gathering us children and tell us stories from the Bible and stories about Jerusalem. And when we ask my uncle why it is so important to you that we will get to Jerusalem, what is in Jerusalem? He described Jerusalem as heaven on earth. And he said, this is our true place. We don't belong here. And when I asked him, when is it going to be? When are we going to get to Jerusalem? He said, very soon.
Extraordinary. It's fascinating for me to think that you have a community that thinks it's alone in the world, preserving a very different form of Judaism from what's practiced around the rest of the world, feeling that immense responsibility, but at the same time experiencing...
In a way, I must say that when I think about our Judaism, I said that this is the origin. This is the clear Judaism that was celebrated during the first temple, and we kept it. The changes happened later. So we kept the grassroots of the...
You're the real Jews.
Yeah. Yeah,
we're the pretenders.
In a way.
So you didn't have Hanukkah or Purim, but you did have your own festivals. Tell me about Sigd.
Sigd. Sikt is a holiday which is celebrated to commemorate Jerusalem, to pray for Jerusalem, and remembering us being part of something bigger. And every year, the Jewish community would gather and pray, go up in one of the mountains with the cases, which is the religious leaders of our community.
You don't have rabbis there, kesim.
Kesim. We didn't have rabbis. It's I guess
a modern invention.
Yeah. So we have cases. Our case, which is which kept the tradition, the Jewish tradition, and led the Ethiopian community in Ethiopia. So it was a day that we praying for Jerusalem, a day that in the first part of the day was fasting and praying, and the second part was like celebrating as if we are already in Jerusalem. So this is, and it's actually, this holiday also exists in the Bible. So we are the only one who kept it.
This is fascinating to me because there's a story that people on college campuses will tell about Zionism and where Israel came from, and says that the Jews are white, and in the 19th century, they came up with a pale imitation of other European nationalist movements and decided to form their own European colonial movement to settle the land of Israel. But what you're telling me is that Ethiopians had their own form of Zionism that had nothing to do with Herzl, nothing to do with forms of European nationalism, but was at the same time rooted in that same experience of anti-Semitism and persecution on the one hand, and a longing for an ancient homeland. What was the trigger where that ancient longing, 2,000 years of climbing up to the highest mountain and praying in the direction of Jerusalem, became an action plan to return?
Well, in the 19th centuries, European researchers like Vajtelovich came to the Jewish villages and realized that there is a Jewish community in Ethiopia. And Vajtelovich, which is really one of the amazing researchers, he was a student in Sorbonne University, and he came to the Ethiopian community in one of the villages, and he said to the people there, "I'm a Jew, and I came to get to know you, to be in touch." And the Jewish community there told him, "Jewish? White Jewish? No." Because in that time, there was a lot of missionary actions in Ethiopia. And we Jewish, we don't want to become Christians. So every white people who came and said, "I'm a Jew," like born-again Jew, we were very suspicious. And he said, he writes in one of his articles that it took him a lot of time to convince the Jewish people in the Jewish in the villages that he's Jew. And when they were convinced, they asked him to go and to wash himself, to like litbol.
To dip in the mikveh.
Yeah.
And ritually cleanse himself.
So he can be part of the community. And he said, it took some time to convince them that I'm a Jew, but I spent all my life to convince the Jewish world that the Ethiopian community is Jew. So
fascinating.
This is also was.
So around the time of the Christian missionary movements, we find the first, really, in the modern era, connection between Ethiopian Jews and Jews in the rest of the world. But at what point does the big aliyah to Israel begin? Because the vast majority of the Ethiopian community now lives in Israel.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Vajtelovich, who spent his life trying to create this connection between the Ethiopian community, the Ethiopian Jewish community, and the other Jewish communities in the world, succeeded to bring about, I think, 15 young Ethiopians to Israel, even though it was not legal. We were not recognized as Jewish people, but he succeeded to bring some kids learn Hebrew, to learn the modern Judaism that occurred during those years.
Because they didn't speak Hebrew in the diaspora. They spoke...
There was, in that time, there was already, because of Faidalovich and other Ethiopian activists, there was also a school, and they spoke a little bit Hebrew.
In Ethiopia?
In Ethiopia.
In addition to Amharic?
In addition, of course.
But the liturgical language, the religious language was?
Ge'ez.
Ge'ez. What is Ge'ez?
Which is one of the 3 Semitic languages, like Arabic, Hebrew, and Ge'ez.
Okay.
It's the holy language, but we kept our tradition in that language, but we didn't have the Hebrew written.
So early years of the State of Israel, there are some Ethiopians who moved to Israel, the first exposure really that people here have.
So they went back to the villages, and since then we realized there is a place, there is a state, Jerusalem exists. And maybe it's possible getting to Jerusalem.
Because until then, they think that Jerusalem is, it's a real place. Why hadn't Ethiopian Jews got up and tried to walk to Jerusalem hundreds of years earlier? Why does it wait for the advent of...
There was actually some people who tried to get to Jerusalem
by
foot. Yeah. Some tragic stories about that. It's not like we were sitting and waiting. We tried. We looked for. We searched for Jerusalem, and I admire people like Faidalovich who came to the villages, but many activists who fought for the Ethiopian community came to Israel are Ethiopian-born or Ethiopian origin activists.
But you're telling me that, in the hundreds of years that Jewish life is developing on a separate trajectory in Europe and in the Middle East, there is a community in Ethiopia that thinks it's all alone, that's trying to get out of that and trying to establish its own Zionist movement, right? Hundreds of years before Herzl.
Exactly. Because we were not part of the Ethiopian society for more than 2,000 years. We were falashas.
Outsiders,
invaders, people who don't belong to the country.
So at what point does the community begin to pack up and leave?
Well, I don't think there was kind of a message or something really clear evidence that it's possible to get to Jerusalem. But we've been dreaming about Jerusalem for thousands of years, and we only needed like someone to tell us there's a way. We know there is Jerusalem. There's a way to get to Jerusalem.
And that way to Jerusalem is essentially to literally walk through hell, through Sudan, to get an airlift organized by Israel to rescue and airlift the vast majority of Ethiopian Jewry. And I want to hear your personal story because it's extraordinary and yet at the same time so reflective of the journey through hell that so many Ethiopian Jews made to get to Israel. But first I want to take just a step back and understand, tell me about your childhood in Ethiopia before the great relocation to Israel.
Well, how much time we have?
We have time.
It's really an amazing, long story. I was born in a small village in Ethiopia. Like villages.
Electricity?
No.
Running water?
No.
Lots of goats?
Yes. Being born in a village it's like there's no school. There is no school? No school.
So you didn't go to school in Ethiopia at all?
I didn't go to school, but from very early age, I have responsibilities in our family because someone should keep the goats and the sheep, bringing water from the spring because we didn't have running water, helping my brothers and fathers in the field. So since the age 6, even 5, I remember myself pretty busy in our family business. And when I only when I became 8, 9, I realized that I'm already a grown person. And I knew that in that point, my father should decide whether I'm going to school like my sisters, or I'm in a way to be getting married.
What do you mean getting married? You're 9.
Yeah. Well, there was talking, promising to someone else that I'll be their daughter-in-law.
Sorry, at the age of 9, your father is already trying to marry you off?
You organize, you do the arrangement.
For a wedding at what age?
11, 10, it's wedding. And 12,
11 or 10?
Yeah. Women got their first child at the age of 12 sometimes.
12?
Yeah.
That's horrific.
It's another world. It's another culture.
But now living in Israel, I imagine you think, thank God you were saved from being a child bride and you would never wish that for your daughters.
I was saved by Jerusalem.
Tell me.
So I asked myself, I asked my father when I'm going to school also, like my sisters, and I didn't get any answer. And I remember that my father went to the city to buy some new dress for me, and I decided that if my father bring with him, buy for me traditional dress, it's a bad sign. It means that I'm going to be married. But if he comes back with a modern dress, then it means I'm going to school. So I was waiting, anxious to my father to come back. And when he came back and he took out the dress, it was a traditional dress. And the meaning was that I'm going to be married. I'm not going to school.
To someone your age, or
I understand
a boy much older?
Maybe a year later, 2 years later. But this is the path. So
you have one party for the wedding and the bat mitzvah.
Yeah. So I was upset, and I remember me going behind our house and, tearing the dress, because I was so upset, and I understood that it's a bad sign to me. I didn't want to get married. No one wanted to marry at the age of 10, 12. So fortunately, few weeks later, no one spoke about weddings or living in Ethiopia or planning our life in the villages. Everyone was talking about the possibility to get to Jerusalem. So I was saved by Jerusalem.
Tell me about the journey through hell to Jerusalem.
It's crazy. When I think about my father and other fathers and mothers that decided to leave everything they knew and start a journey to where? Who's waiting for us? How dangerous is the journey? They didn't know much. They had this dream about Jerusalem, and they just packed everything and escaped actually from Ethiopia, escaped from our village to Sudan, because the government in Ethiopia didn't allow the Jewish to live. So we had to escape at night, hiding, walk only through the night at the beginning until we were far from places that there are people who can see us and tell the authorities that we're trying to escape from Ethiopia. And later on, we slept a little bit at night and walked during the day, many kilometers a day. We're talking about 750 kilometers.
You walked 750 kilometers?
Yes.
And so many Jews perished along the way in those horrific conditions.
Unfortunately, too many.
Did you lose people in your family?
Yeah. Every family lost someone. My 2 brothers My father was married to, not to my mother, but to another woman. And two of them actually died in the refugee camp in Sudan. And about a quarter of the people who did the journey in order to get to Jerusalem, about 4,000 Ethiopian Jews died in Sudan on the way to Sudan.
Extraordinary.
So I was lucky. Many of us was lucky to survive this dangerous journey. I spent about 6 months in the refugee camp in
Sudan.
Yeah.
Hiding your Jewish identity?
Hiding our Jewish identity because we were escaping from Ethiopia, and it's not that the Sudanian welcome us. So we had to hide our identity. And again, we've been told that we should wait, be quiet, and someone will reach us to take us to our final journey.
And then finally you get on this secret airlift to Israel, organized by Israel Secret Service.
Israel Secret Service, and many good people like George Gutelman. George Gutelman has, Israel could not land in Sudan and take out the Jews, so they have to find a solution for that. They asked George Gutelman, who had an airline company that flew pilgrims to Mecca and in Arab countries. That was the business of George Gutelman. And they asked him, he was a Jew, he was a Holocaust survivor. His mother was murdered in the Holocaust. And he was kept by a Christian family that saved his life and his brother's life. And when the Mossad actually asked him to help, I think he felt like this is his time to save others like he was saved.
Such an amazing story.
And he contributed his plans. And I guess I was one of 7,000 Jews who were rescued by George Gutelman's airline company, who afterwards lost the business because the operation became public.
Extraordinary. And, what an extraordinary sacrifice.
Yeah.
Thomas, you arrive in Israel. Tell me the first time you saw a white Jew.
Actually, I mean, I saw a white Jew on the aeroplane. I was not thinking much about it. But when I landed in Israel and I woke up in a boarding school with Israeli children running around in my first morning in Israel, I realized that the children running around are a bit lighter. I mean, I could see that I'm different when I saw children my age next to me. So that morning was actually the first time I realized that my hair is a little bit curly and my skin is dark, and I'm a bit different from those children running around. But it didn't mean to me something bad or
was it surprising for you the first time you saw non-black Jews?
Yes. Yeah. We were convinced that we are the only remaining Jews in the world.
Tell me, there were also many Ethiopian Jews who, I read in Danny Adino Abebe's remarkable book, his memoirs as the first Ethiopian journalist in Israel, which I had the honor of translating into English.
So you know the story
from Africa
very
to
well.
Zion. He speaks of Ethiopian Jews who made Aliyah and immediately got on a bus in Jerusalem and asked to see the temple because they were sure it was still standing.
Yeah.
Was that your experience too?
No, actually, when I landed, and I was thinking about my uncle's promise about the heaven on earth. When I landed, in a way, it was like a heaven on earth to me. The modern Israeli, the buildings, the cars, the electricity, everything is so amazing. So to me, it was also Jerusalem. I didn't need the temple, or I maybe didn't know that I'm not in Jerusalem. I'm in Pardes Chana.
Extraordinary. now, tell me, you've since Since making Aliyah to Israel, you've become very active politically, locally, also on a national level. You ran for Knesset on the left of the political map. And we're now experiencing a moment in which the global left has completely turned on Israel. Being anti-Israel has become part of the basket of progressive causes. If you are pro-LGBT, anti-climate change, if you stand up for black people around the world, it means you've got to hate Israel because oppressed people of the world unite against the evil white Jews. I wonder how that makes you feel when you see people on the left turning against Israel in the name of their progressive values, allegedly.
I think they don't know Israel. They don't see the Israeli society, how diverse it is. They don't understand that the State of Israel was established as the homeland of the Jewish people suffering from all over the world. They should remember my story, a 10-year-old girl living in a country that didn't accept her. The State of Israel is the home is my home, is the home for Jewish people from around the world that needs some safe place. And the State of Israel is a democratic country. Our value is human rights, women's rights, gay rights. And when I see those values, how they practice in Islamist countries, I must say that they far behind. And I can say to those black progressive protesters that the Jewish people were the one who stand up with Martin Luther King fighting for the right of the black community in America. And I want them to examine carefully where is easier to live as a black person, in democratic countries or Islamist countries.
I've personally been shocked to discover that there are people in America, including African Americans, who are shocked that there are black people in Israel, that there are black Jews. And they think that standing up for the oppressed means hating on Israel and being against Israel because they see it as a force of oppression. What do you say to those people in America?
Do they know that there are black Jews in Israel? That Israel is a very diverse country? By the name of good and bad, you actually fight against your own values. Values for human rights, values for equality, values for democracy. We, minorities, have to fight harder for democratic values, for equality, because otherwise we are the first to pay the price.
Mehereta Baruch-Ron, thank you so much for coming on State of a Nation. This has been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eylon.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation with Mehereta Baruch-Ron. As always, if you enjoy these episodes, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts, and follow us on all the social media platforms. I'm Eylon Levy, taking you beyond the headlines and between the lines. Thanks for watching.